Do your Stanhopeas look like this? Or perhaps even like this? More of a lost hopea than a Stanhopea. But let's go through the Stanhopea culture sheet and see what we can do to make those look like this again. Welcome to the Nature Company. If this is the kind of information you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't already, and that notification bell to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. So some of the reasons that Stanhopeas are so sought after for collections is not only because of their humongous, beautiful, fragrant flowers, but also because they're easy growers and they're robust, fast-growing plants and can make a spectacular show in anyone's collection. They're also relatively adaptable as to the potting media that you can use to grow them in. They can grow in anything from cymbidium compost, pure sphagnum moss, plain bark, or a mixture of any of the in-between, as long as it's got good drainage and a fair moisture holding capacity, because these babies don't like to dry out terribly much. And with regards to those flowers, they only last 3 to 5 days each, but often you're lucky. The whole flower spike doesn't always open at the same time, so that gives you a slightly longer flowering period. And if you're looking after them properly, they can send out multiple spikes over that flowering period. With Stanhopeas, the majority of them flower during summer, so you can get spectacular summer displays from them. They will fill the whole house or the whole outdoor area with that incredible scent that they have. And when potting up your Stanhopeas, you generally want to pot them up into a hanging basket so that those flower spikes can come out the bottom and be enjoyed. The hanging baskets can be anything from wire to wooden slats, whatever you prefer, but just remember, with the wire, make sure the gauge is big enough that your flower spikes can push their way through, or with the wooden slats, that you have a big enough gap in those wooden slats that those large buds can push their way through and out into the open. And again, with your hanging baskets, make sure you don't go too deep, because the flower spike only has a certain distance that it can grow, and if it can't grow out through the bottom, those flowers aren't going to open. They'll just rot inside your media. So make sure you use a shallower basket so that those flower spikes can pop out through the bottom. Also when choosing your basket and what you're going to be using to keep the media in the basket, don't go with something that's going to be too thick. Your flower spike is never going to be able to push all the way through these layers of cocoa fiber, so rather reduce it down to just a single layer where you can almost see through it, so that the flower spike can get through easily. You could also use something like newspaper, which may seem a bit unsightly, but your newspaper will eventually rot away, and by then your roots will be holding your media in place. Because there are those vigorous fast growers, those roots can grab hold of that media relatively quickly and you should be fine. And then, as suggested with your media, ensuring that it does hold moisture long enough that the bulbs don't dry out completely, because once they do start to wrinkle, generally they won't plumpen up again, and you want those nice, big, strong, plump, mature pseudobulbs for those flowers to be formed from. So your watering has to be generally consistent throughout the year, making sure that there's at least some moisture, even in those stages where they can, if the temperatures go low enough, stop their active growth during winter. If you've got the right climate for them, they can keep active growth throughout the year. There are certain varieties, for instance, the Stanhopea genesiana, that wants a nice winter rest. There you're not going to give it any water during that winter period. But the majority of them like to have that moisture throughout the year. And when it comes to feeding, when they're such active growers, during that spring and summer when they grow the most, that's when I feed with every watering. But I don't use a chemical feed. I only use organic feed on them, because high nitrogen concentrations can burn the leaves and leave your Stanhopea with black spots on it, and it's not a very good look. And this is what you'll land up with: the sun damage in your Stanhopea, the bleaching out of the chlorophyll, and the crisping up of the edges of the leaves, and also of the pseudobulbs. They'll just burn up and bleach out the chlorophyll and wither up eventually. Stanhopeas are also sensitive to high salt concentrations in their media, so I try to stay away from those chemical fertilizers whatsoever, so that I don't have to worry terribly much about flushing. As they start slowing down their growth periods during the autumn, I'll probably only feed them once a week, and then in winter, if they stop their active growth altogether, then I reduce their watering right down and stop feeding completely. Depending on your climate, if you're still getting good active growth during that winter period, you'll still need to keep your watering levels up slightly higher, and possibly give them a spot of food occasionally to ensure that they can keep growing healthily, because we want those big, fat, plump pseudobulbs to produce all those magnificent blooms. And the lighting conditions for your Stanhopeas are basically going to be the same as what you'd be looking for your Cattleyas. You're looking for a bright, diffuse light. But as it starts heading towards summer, what I like to do is move them outdoors so that they can then get higher, stronger light. This helps force out more flowers. But not only is it the extra light that they're then able to produce more food from that produces more flowers, it's also that fluctuation in day-night temperatures, which you're going to get a more exaggerated fluctuation outdoors than you are going to get indoors. And they like a good 10 to 15 degrees Celsius fluctuation between day and night temperatures to really push out those blooms. So by moving it outdoors in my climate, this is the way I get the most flowers out of them. Talking about temperature in general, Stanhopeas generally come from climates that are pretty even throughout the year. Very little temperature change between the summers and the winters. So generally, although you do get warm growing, intermediate growing and cool growing Stanhopeas, their temperature variations still aren't that much. So as a good rule of thumb, you can work at approximately 10 to 18 degrees being the lows, which is approximately 50 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And for the highs, you'd be looking at between 20 and 29 degrees Celsius, which is about 65 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. They will accept temperatures that are out of these ranges in the lows and highs, but not for extended periods. As soon as those periods of temperature extremes are extended for too long, then you start getting abortion of your flowers, you start getting discoloration of the leaves, and eventually you'll actually get malformation of the new growths. So it's best to try and keep them in a nice stable environment so that they can keep growing healthily. And your Stanhopeas only flowering from those nice big plump mature pseudobulbs helps you understand that when you're buying young seedlings, it's going to take 3 to 5 years for those pseudobulbs to get big and strong enough to actually really produce the show of flowers that you're looking for. Even when doing divisions, if the clumps are too small, it's then going to take 2-3 years for those new pseudobulbs to mature enough to be able to produce flowers. If you've got nice large clumps, then you're probably better off and you should be able to get flower spikes in the next season if you've removed them at the right times. The watering, the light, and the temperatures are going to be your main 3 factors to keep your Stanhopeas healthy. The media is not all that awfully important because they can adapt to the different medias as long as it's well drained and holds some moisture. And they're actually relatively adaptable to humidity levels as long as, again, you're keeping your watering constant. And this is what will happen to your Stanhopea if you put it under too much water stress. It will just wither up all the old bulbs. This has especially happened over a long dry winter period, and all the bigger bulbs have now lost all their leaves, and even it's battling to sustain some of the newer growth. But you'll see all those new buds starting to come out as water has been reintroduced to it as the spring came along. This is not going to give you any flowers because now we don't have any mature bulbs that are going to be plump and strong enough to produce flowers. So this we're going to have to wait another at least 1 to 2 years to get flowers from. So avoid that water stress periods, especially over those long dry winters. The humidity levels aren't all that awfully important because they can adapt to a wide variety of humidity levels, as long as you're keeping your water levels constant so that you're not having that wrinkling of the pseudobulbs. Because they're relatively easy and robust plants, just watching those few requirements should breed amazing success with your Stanhopeas. But let me warn you, Stanhopea mania is a real thing. You'll never land up with just one. Thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button down below, and hit that notification bell. Bing bong!